Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to crisis management, COVID, well-being, resilience, business continuity, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. One other quick announcement, I will be co-presenting a keynote speech with Margaret Millett at BCI World Hybrid in November 2nd to 3rd in London, and fingers crossed, we will be there in person. As you can see on my screen, it is the time for the bringer of happiness. We're going to have a wonderful episode today, right? Regina Phelps, welcome back.
Alex, it is such a treat to be with you as always. And my goodness, I feel like I'm having a flashback. But
I know, like we said before recording, I feel like I've been here before.
I know.
So what's going on with the pandemic? All happiness,
right. What can I say? Well, I'm just going to jump in and show some slides because there's so much to talk about. It's just easier to actually do that. So we're recording this on July 25th. Just so for people to timestamp, if you're listening to this, things could be really different by the time you maybe hear this. I don't know. But let me just start by saying, first of all, is that we are in a large surge across the world, really driven by the BA.5 variant, which is a subvariant of Omicron. And I just want to talk through some of the issues here because this is an important moment in the pandemic. So first of all, I'm going to show you a couple of slides today. This is from Arent Topol, and Arent Topol is a really well-known physician. If you don't follow him on Twitter, I would encourage you to do so, or also on LinkedIn. He's actually from Scripps Institute in San Diego, California. And he has been a real great source of really good, reliable information over the course of the pandemic. He recently started a blog on Substrate that actually has really great information. And this was his blog that he released about 24 hours ago, so on July 24th. And it has some really good visuals, which is what I wanted to share. So if you are seeing this on YouTube, you will be seeing them. And as Alex always says, if you're listening on Voice America, you could go over to YouTube if you wanted to see them, because I think they are helpful. So first of all, as everybody painfully well knows, we're 2.5 years into this experience. And oh my gosh, it just doesn't seem to go away, does it? So many times people are saying, well, like, what the heck is going on? And why is this such an issue? And I got vaccinated and I'm getting sick and all of those things. And really, the answer that Arent Topol really clearly stated in his blog of yesterday, July 24th, is it's the virus. It's not the vaccines. And this is a really great starter to our discussion today, because what you see when you look at this particular slide, and again, I'll try and describe it to you visually for those listening only, is that it shows all of the major variants and the ancestral strain of SARS-CoV-2. And when you look at the slide, what you'll see is from the time that the virus was first discovered, which was in December of 2019 in China, until really about December 2020, so over a year, we had 0 changes to the virus. And just to remind all of you, all of the vaccines currently in circulation are only designed and built to immediately react to the ancestral strain. Now, that does not mean that the vaccines are not effective. They're primarily now really effective against serious illness, hospitalizations, and death. However, because it was, just imagine that you're making a dress or you're cutting a pattern and it's made for a particular size and shape. And the next thing you know, you gain 20 pounds in the pandemic. Right? Well, the dress isn't going to fit you the same. And it's the same kind of metaphor. The vaccines were made for one particular look of the virus. Now the look and shape is different. So therefore, that's why the vaccines do not stop many people from getting infected. But I want to emphasize, and I'll show you slides about this also, it really prevents serious illness and death. But when look at this slide, you'll see we went along, beautifully for 12 months, no changes. Then we hit the first variant. And I remember this very clearly in December of 2020 when Alpha basically was discovered in the UK. Alpha made a big splash actually in Europe and a little bit in the United States, but not much really. But when Delta came along, that was pretty much around the July timeframe of 2021, it ravaged the world. And that was our first super changed subvariant, and one that was really devastating. That kind of wrapped up, if you will, around January. But then Omicron, I remember it was the American Thanksgiving of 2021 and the end of November, where this variant first was discovered. And it was discovered, as we know, actually in South Africa. And since then, Omicron has had many babies. And so we have BA1, BA.2, and then there's BA.4 and BA.5. BA.5 is the most changed subvariant of Omicron. And there's a lot of discussion is that it should really be its own variant. It's so different, but it's still in the same lineage. And it is driving the surge that we're seeing across the United States and the world right now. So here's kind of just an overview of some of what we're seeing around the world. And it's really a slide looking at some of the big hospitalization figures. And you can see that the Greece, UK, Ireland, France, the United States, Denmark, the Netherlands, Italy, all are really seeing a big uptick in cases, but also in hospitalizations. So it's not just that we're seeing lots of cases, but we're seeing hospitalizations as well. And as we all know, with the increase of home testing, especially in the US and many other countries around the world, the case count doesn't mean much anymore. Most experts believe that you could either take that number that you're seeing in your local newspaper and either multiply it times a factor of 5 all the way up to 10, and you still may not have the most accurate information. So any idea what's going on in Canada before we talk about other places?
Things are, since the last time, I said last month, I believe everything was kind of flat or trending down.
Right.
That's not the case anymore. Things are starting to tick up, cases and hospitalizations. I know last week, I believe it was, the province of Quebec has recorded a couple of thousand cases a day, which hasn't been that high for, I think it was the last year or beginning of May. So they came down and now they're starting to come back up. And the same thing is happening here all across the country. And they've also started to do the travel restrictions again. But not necessarily within the country or for Canadians, but for foreign travelers. They did stop the I guess it was, I forget, there's different names for it, but you had to prove that you were vaccinated and all this kind of stuff. Right. And now they've implemented random testing again. But they've taken it out of the airports because if anyone's watched the news, airports around the globe are just horrendous right now. So, yeah, right. But they have started random testing for all these foreign travelers that are coming in. I've heard any number from 10% of foreign travelers right up to half of them. So wow. Who knows what it could be? I think some people are just probably speaking out of panic, and others are just stating numbers of what they would like to see. But I haven't seen any firm number yet. So that's happening. The vaccines for children 5 and under and babies has all been approved, and clinics are actually opening across the country. Oh, good for you. To do that, and people they've already getting their needles, put it that way. And for 4th doses or boosters, I believe it's 6 months since your last or your 3rd booster, you're eligible. FYI, today is the day I am eligible for my 4th booster. Woohoo! 6 months today, 6 months ago today was the 3rd shot. So I am eligible. So this week I will be looking that up and finding out where I can book for my 4th booster. There are calls again for indoor masks at shopping malls or grocery stores, things like that, potentially school, simply because they are seeing numbers go up. So I think some people want to try and proactively halt anything from happening. But again, that also brings out some of the crazies who don't think anything should happen. And this whole thing for the last 2.5 years has been a hoax. And let's see what else is going on here. I think that's mostly it for now. Still the recording of COVID statistics and trying to find them is not easy,
Right.
because people are living with it. I know before we started recording, I happened to mention to you that I had a bad cold for 2 weeks roughly, which kind of looked like COVID. And apologies to anybody who sometimes might hear my voice come out nasally or suddenly I start coughing. I'm still getting over it. But
you tested negative, right? So
I tested negative, and work colleagues who had the exact same thing as I did tested negative. Friends and family on the East Coast and neighbors all got the same thing, all tested negative. So, I don't know if maybe we have this new variant or if, it really was just a cold, because it was that time of year where we had hot and then cold, and going in and out of air conditioning buildings can sometimes, really affect your sinuses and things like that. I know it does me sometimes, but that's really where things stand in Canada. How about other places?
Well, this is a good segue into this particular slide, which shows you what's happening in Japan as an example. This is the most confirmed cases. They're still doing a lot of PCR testing in Japan, which is not like most of the world now. And so you can just see that they have kind of went along, not much going on. And astronomically, this week, they have had this skyrocket to 140,000 cases, doubling what they almost ever had before. Kind of shocking. So that just gives you a sense of this. Here in the US, we're seeing, what do we think? 100,000 cases, but most people think it's probably 1 million cases. Our hospitalizations are about 44,000. And also we're seeing, minimal uptake in vaccines and boosters. And that's really the big problem here in the US, is that the 2 vaccines will keep you from probably having a serious hospitalization or death. But what you really need to really boost your immune system is the boosters. And so everybody in the United States is eligible for 3, and increasingly many people are now getting a 4th one as well. And so I would encourage you, if you're in the US, find out if you're eligible. And if you are, please get boosted. It makes a huge difference in your overall ability to fight off the virus. I do also want to point out, in places that, of course, had very little COVID, like Australia, they are really on fire right now, but not just with cases, but also with a huge uptick in hospitalizations. And so they had more of a naive, if you will, immune population. They've had obviously a good uptick in vaccinations in Australia, but again, that's still just the 2 doses. And so, and many people had never seen COVID. And so for a lot of them, you can see it's really made a huge increase, both in cases and hospitalizations, and sadly deaths as well. So many times this will get people to say, well, okay, why aren't the vaccines working? Darn it. I want to remind you, it's a different size dress, right? So it's not the same. What this slide shows you is that we have basically 3 levels of defense in our immune system. There's the first line of defense, which is essentially your innate immunity. Then their next one is this, essentially what are called neutralizing antibodies. And then our 3rd level is what are called T cells and B cell responses, which is cellular immunity. The new variant BA.5 basically blows through the first 2 levels. The cellular response in COVID does not really begin until about a week or so, maybe a little bit longer, after you've actually been exposed and your infection has begun. So it's not that it's not going to kick in, but it really kicks in later on. And that's because Your immune system it doesn't have those neutralizing antibodies moving about your bloodstream. It has to really kind of get your cells to go, oh my gosh, now let's see, what was this thing I was exposed to? And it then mounts the immune response. But it takes a little bit of time, about a week, which is why people can be exposed. They can actually then develop the infection, and then the immune system will kick in, which is why you don't have this issue of serious illness, hospitalizations, and death, for the most part, in people who have been immunized. Now, that's a fight that I have with a lot of people who say to me, but Regina, why should I get immunized? Because it's not even matching exactly this virus. And I'll say that's true, but you will develop this cellular immunity, and your T cells and B cells will save you. So you still could get infected, yes, but you may not become seriously ill, which is the big point. And this really gets to the fight I have, frankly, with a lot of people about vaccines. And that is that we have had just a huge number of lives saved. So if you look at this slide, when we actually saw, if you look on the far left, you'll see actually the deaths in the different income countries, and you'll see high, upper middle, lower, and low middle. But then when you start moving over to the right, what you'll see is when vaccines were introduced and the impacts they had. And this was a study that was done by the British Medical Journal. And they discovered that in the research that if we would have kept on our same trajectory about what we experienced in 2020, we would have actually had 20 million more people die if there had not been vaccines. Wow. And that's the big dark purple part. And that is huge. And then the smaller lavender area is ones that were likely averted, but in the more indirectly. But the actual change of having vaccines and the impact it's had has been tremendous. And so we can't really discount that. And again, if you're saying I shouldn't get vaccinated, I don't need to get vaccinated, or I'm not going to get boosted because I still got sick or whatever, what I want to say to you is that this vaccine is a miracle. You still may get sick, but you're not going to get sick and die. And that's really what vaccines were meant to do. And this particular slide shows that if you actually have, who's dying, essentially, it still is mainly the unvaccinated. So there's a very dark, thick line on this particular graph, and that's the line you see at the top. Those are the deaths in unvaccinated people. And you can see it's pretty large, right? I mean, that's where the deaths are really occurring. And then what you'll see, if they only had the primary series, which is 2 shots, that's the dotted line. If they had the primary series with 1 booster, that's the next kind of black line that's a little bit below that dotted line. And then people that have gotten 2 shots, you'll see is the purple line at the bottom. So if you are eligible for boosters, get them. Because it makes a significant difference in your ability to fight off the illness, which I think is something that we all want to be thinking about.
It's like when you get a cut, putting something on it, or even if it's just a Band-Aid before you get to the doctor's office.
Right.
Something is better than nothing, because if you just left it open, you're cut open, you're opening it up to more issues.
Right. Exactly right.
Infections and things like that. So.
Exactly right. And so, and I think this is the time for people to really double down on vaccines. Here in the United States, we have the 0 to 5 vaccines have been available for about 4 months now, but still there's already a discussion that we have already hit the peak of when people are expecting to vaccinate their kids, sadly, with only about 30% of those kids under the age of 5 being vaccinated in the US. And COVID, increasingly in the Omicron series, seems to be affecting children more than any of the other variants we would have had. Now, I would like to just talk about a few quick things before I know we normally stop right here, but can I just keep going a little bit farther?
Sure, Alex? Yeah, keep going.
What I want to do is I want to talk about COVID treatments, because now that more and more people are getting sick, I want to remind them what they should be thinking about. So here in the world of COVID, there's basically 2 phases of the illness. There's something called the viral replication phase, which is about the first 7 to 10 days from the onset of symptoms. And that is the time for antivirals. It's the time for monoclonal antibodies. And that is the treatment, and that's available widely. And so that includes things like Paxlovid, Molnupiravir, and a few others, which I'll talk more about in just a second. Then there's what's called the inflammatory phase, which usually is, again, about day 7 to 10, it starts. And this is when people start having more compromisability in their breathing. And then when you are really, your body is mounting this gigantic response. And this is where at the very beginning of COVID, people got into lots of trouble. They were admitted to ICUs. They were intubated. This is the time for steroids. And this is the time for anticoagulation therapy. And this is the time for oxygen support. I want to emphasize about the difference here. And because many physicians don't really understand the difference between these two phases. And repeatedly, I hear of friends of mine, physicians that I know, who somebody all of a sudden came down with COVID, and the first drug that was offered them by their family physician was steroids. Now, why is that a problem if you give it in the viral replication phase? The virus is replicating, building in your body. You need your immune system to jump on it. What steroids do is it tamps down the immune response. So there have been some very recent studies of people who were wrongly placed on steroids in the first 7 to 10 days, and they could not mount a response. And the issues of serious hospitalizations, intubation, ICU admissions, and death if steroids are given in the viral replication phase. And so I am still shocked how many doctors do not know this, or they don't believe in things like Paxlovid, which is the approved antiviral. And so people need to be smart themselves when they go to their doctor. There have been also many research studies, double-blinded studies for lots of ineffective medications, including ivermectin, which is a parasitic drug for worms in horses. That was actually promoted by President Trump and others. Hydrochloroquine, same thing. And then two other, erythromycin, which is an antibiotic, and nitazoxanide, which is another parasitic. They have been promoted heavily by physicians who are not so credible, but have a big platform. And they have been discounted in 1 million different studies. And so I have a link to the bottom of the slide, which I have sent you, and I would encourage people to check that out. This particular document, which I would encourage you to also download, is done by NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health here in the United States. And they clearly tell you what are the approved therapies. So looking at the top, what you're going to see is Paxlovid, which is a drug by Pfizer, has a 98% effectiveness. That's pretty darn good against death and serious illness. Remdesivir, which you win in an outpatient basis in the first 7 to 10 days, is given intramuscularly, or can also be given as an IV. Bebtelovimab, which is still working, and then also Molnupiravir, which is actually by Merck. So any of those can be effective choices for treatments in those first, again, 7 days. All of those ideally are started within the first 5 days of symptom onset. Every day past that after the first 5 days, these drugs will be less effective. And then you hit the inflammation stage, and then they're not going to be effective at all. And so this is really important. You need to understand this because a lot of physicians don't. And the document that I've sent to Alex is this particular one that's, again, treatment guidelines. This has just been reviewed, and they refresh it every day. It was refreshed today on July 25th. So I want to just encourage everybody to be smart about their own treatments, what their options are, and to advocate for yourself if you end up being COVID positive.
And the link that you just referenced, I will make sure that's in the description for this video on YouTube and Voice America, so people can see that. Interesting, I noticed bleach wasn't on there.
No, neither was light either, injecting light. So yes, and I'm sorry I had to go so long, but there's just so much to talk about. And again, because I hear so many horror stories of people being treated completely inappropriately by their physicians, I just think that people need to be smart and don't just assume that your doctor understands this.
Yeah, but a part of me can't help but think, if we've been here before after 2.5 years, how come we still can't get at least this part right?
I know,
You know,
right? Right.
it's amazing.
It is amazing.
But oh well. Well, we've come to the end of our first segment. We are talking with Regina Phelps, and we will be right back.
If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.